If you miss a live session, you can go back at any time to watch on demand. Go to Watch Replays and click on the session that you want to view. Have you created your own event agenda in SwapCard? Visit the Agenda and Watch Replay tabs to add sessions that interest you to your own event. You can go back to My Event to revisit any bookmarked sessions, sponsors, and items. We want to make sure that you're connecting with our industry-leading sponsors. You can interact with them by visiting the Booths in the Sponsor tab. You can also bookmark sponsors or add items to your event to view later. Sponsors have uploaded extra materials for attendees. Make sure to visit sponsors that interest you to chat with one of their team members or save documents for later. We have dedicated meeting slots set up for break times between sessions. Continue the discussion by requesting meetings from others in the SwapCard platform. Schedule a meeting with another attendee or a sponsor by visiting their page. The panelists and speakers will be addressing your questions live during the stream. During the stream, use the question tab to ask your questions early in the presentation. Go to the poll tab to answer polls that will be discussed during the live stream. If you need help navigating SwapCard, please reach out to our team by mentioning @Parks Associates in the chat box or by contacting one of our team members via our company page. Welcome to the 4th annual Future of Video OTT, Pay TV, and Digital Media, a virtual series taking place across 2021. Consumers and their entertainment choices are the key drivers in the entertainment industry. As more video entertainment options become available, bringing more freedom of choice, consumer preferences will determine their usage patterns and the size and content of their portfolios. Market conditions have also changed the nature of competition in video services. Consumers are willing to carry multiple video accounts to get the content they want, so in many instances, a service is desired based on how it complements other services in the market. Thank you for attending Future of Video, OTT, Pay TV, and Digital Media.
Hello everyone, welcome to today's Parks Associates Future Video session, Capturing the Consumer Video Engagement Strategies, sponsored by Delta Trade. We'd like to take a moment to first thank our sponsors that make today's session and the Future Video series possible, our research partners Everise and Symphony Media AI, our session sponsors Comcast Technology Solutions and Delta Trade, our gold sponsors Brightcove and Future Today, our silver sponsor Bitmovin, and thank you also to Metrological for sponsoring our break. Thank you all for your support of Future Video. We want to also thank our media and industry association supporters who make today possible also. Our Platinum supporters, CEDIA, Connected Design, DealerScope, SCTE, the Monitoring Association, and the Z-Wave Alliance. Thank you all. Thank you also to our supporters, the Asia Video Industry Association, the HomeGrid Forum, and the Media Institute. Thank you all for supporting Future Video. And to give you a brief overview of how today is going to go, I'm going to kick things off with my insight and view of the market. I'll then have our visionary fireside chat with Gabriel Berger, the CEO of Think Analytics. Then Parks Associates President Elizabeth Parks will conduct our executive Q&A portion with Jenna Travulis of DeltaTray. And then we'll get into a great panel discussion with Damien Reed of The Filter, Matt Smith of Symphony Media AI, Jeremy Strauss of Tastemade, and Trent Wheeler from Gracenote. And at the end of the panel, we'll have audience Q&A with the speakers, and then we'll invite the audience to participate in our Zoom Rooms networking discussion on key challenges in engaging video consumers. Okay, before we begin, I'd like to encourage our audience to submit your Q&A questions for our guest speaker and panelists at any time during today's program through SwapCard. And to give you a view of what we've covered throughout the year and what we have in store later this afternoon, coming up later today, we have our final session of the year on OTT bundling partnerships, so we hope you can join for that. You can also freely go back to check out all of our great sessions from this year with in-depth insights from decision makers across this industry. I'd like to kick things off by giving some background from the Parks Associates perspective on why engagement is crucial and why it needs to address an increasingly diverse video landscape. Our discussion panel will then dig a bit deeper and look at engagement strategies and best practices at scale. Before I begin, brief intro. I'm Paul Erickson. I'm a senior analyst of Parks Associates on our entertainment team, covering the consumer technology landscape. And in my 16 years as an analyst, I've covered the video market from the consumer and the service provider ends of the spectrum. And as a background for our discussions today, let's first look at why it's important for services and content owners to focus on engagement as we draw to the end of 2021 and look to 2022 and beyond. Today, aided by the pandemic's effect on OTT viewing habits, streaming video usage is the norm across the country. Over 80% of US broadband households have at least one OTT video subscription, and this growth in adoption hasn't stopped since 2018. And OTT subscriptions outnumber those of pay TV, and streaming is now the primary way that video is consumed in the US now. And one byproduct of this popularity has been an overwhelming amount of choice for the consumer, which they've wholeheartedly embraced. Almost half of consumers have 4 or more OTT video subscriptions, and this stacking of services is continuing to grow. And there's an inevitable point of subscription fatigue, however, from having a finite amount of time and budget to spend. And we're seeing that now, with adoption beginning to slow. And in fact, on the figure you see here, if we were to put up a Q3, that number would be 49% having 4 or more services. We're seeing people getting more discriminating and intentional with what they subscribe to and eventually keeping subscribed to every month. And so the large number of service choices and the ease of subscription and cancellation is great for the consumer. They can easily switch to an alternative if they're unhappy, but this is challenging for streaming services due to the inherently higher churn potential that this creates. So competition is happening at a breakneck pace today, not just to bring in subscribers, but also to keep them engaged and continuing to subscribe month after month. No one is immune, and their subscription growth slowed down even for Disney with its immense content ecosystem advantages. Thus, even from a top-level view of the market, engagement is becoming increasingly important to be able to capture and anchor in a stable subscription revenue base in an environment that's becoming more competitive and more challenging as a business. Having a focused engagement strategy is a necessity, and understanding how to optimize the strategy also requires understanding where you'll be meeting the consumer, what devices and platforms they're watching on, and any differences in how they're using those devices to consume streaming content. Parks Associates research evaluated what connected TV devices are actively in use in US broadband households. And as shown here, a few select devices for perspective, the adoption level of most devices either remained stable or decreased slightly over the course of this pandemic year. And the lone exception is notable, smart TVs. And smart TVs are now in active use in 56% of US broadband households, and they've become the backbone of streaming video consumption at home. And while smart TVs should thus be a primary platform in video services and service providers' engagement strategies, this is only part of the consumption picture. Meeting the customer where they are means your engagement strategy has to account for multiple hardware platforms, not just the TV. Parks Associates data shows that 72% of consumers report regularly using multiple platforms to consume video, and over 40% view video on all of our tested platforms: TV, TV-connected devices, mobile devices such as smartphones and tablets, and PCs. Digging a bit deeper, Parks research found differences in how devices are used, varying by the type of content that's watched. So set-top boxes saw the most usage for service provider video. Streaming media players are most used for SVOD and AVOD viewing. Consoles and smartphones are most used for YouTube, Twitch, and other video-focused sites. And smart TVs are, in essence, the platform with the most balanced jack-of-all-trades usage of the top 3 devices between service provider viewing, SVOD, and AVOD. So certain platforms are distinctly used more for particular types of video consumption than others, and an optimal engagement strategy should be built around those variances. And there's one more layer of complexity to navigate when trying to fine-tune where you're engaging the consumer and keeping them engaged. And that's on what software platform you're going to deliver that highly engaged experience on. Parks Associates research found that when looking at the software platforms of the devices within US broadband households that were the primary device to watch video on, 3 platforms comprised 65% of those devices: Roku, Samsung Tizen, and Amazon Fire TV. And while these 3 players' platforms control a large piece of the market, just serving the needs of subscribers on those platforms isn't enough. Services and content owners must contend with the nuances of keeping subscribers engaged on a wide variety of platforms in order to maximize their total available subscriber market in this competitive market landscape. And I'd like to close with bringing in the one factor that maintaining high, the one factor in maintaining high engagement that should always be the backbone when you're thinking about multi-platform engagement strategies. And that's content. And so content, in terms of maximizing customer acquisition, engagement, and stickiness, it's the key to success. And content comprises 3 out of the top 5 factors that drive OTT subscriptions. And in terms of retention and churn, not finding the right content or running out of content to watch are 2 of the top 5 reasons for people leaving, churning away from the service. And so content's the main catalyst on both sides of the subscriber journey. Thus, matching the right kind of content to the right subscriber and doing that consistently is going to be a force multiplier that benefits not just engagement, but also subscriber retention and churn reduction. So now that I've set the backdrop and outlined why maintaining high engagement is so essential in today's competitive environment, how it has to account for the variances of how people are consuming on different types of devices, and why content is so crucial to not just engagement, but the entire customer journey, and I'm happy to present for the Visionary Insight portion of today's program, Gabriel Berger, the CEO of Think Analytics. And for over 25 years, Gabriel is focused on developing and deploying solutions and platforms that foster the intersection of information and entertainment. Prior to joining Think Analytics, Gabriel was EVP of Sales and Operations at Ubiquity, and he was also SVP of Sales at Digital Smiths. Gabriel lives in Marina del Rey, California, and likely enjoys weather that makes the rest of us jealous year-round. We're very happy to have him here today. And very quickly before we begin, just a reminder to our audience to submit any questions you might have for Gabriel into the questions chat box and swap card. With that out of the way, Gabriel, welcome. We're honored to have you with us today. And given your experience and Think Analytics' influential position in the industry, we're very interested in hearing your perspective on engagement in the video business today.
Well, it's absolutely my pleasure. Just give me 1 second here. Thanks, Paul, and thanks for Parks Associates for allowing me the opportunity to speak today. We're in an interesting business here, and I would say that one of the things we see is that we're probably, as a business, the most stressed and challenged. Because content is king. Content is king, but as Eric Schmidt said, content really is context is what really wears its crown, right? So that really means how do you start? How do you really push the fact that in that case, context is all about having content find the right people or the right people find the right content. Either the content's following you or you go look for the content. So I'm going to just share my screen here. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
We don't see it yet, Gabriel.
Oh,
Let's see. While we wait for Gabriel to get relogged in and solve a couple technical hurdles here, just want to remind our audience that during the panel discussion to come in a few minutes, we're going to have a few polling questions that will come up, and we encourage you to send your answers into those poll questions, and we will review those results with our panel when they come up and see if they have any interesting reactions to the results. So definitely submit for those. And I think while we're still solving the technical issues with Gabriel logging in here, just a reminder, we have our new Q3 survey results in here at Parks Associates, and a couple factors that may be relevant to the engagement topic today and why it's so crucial. The churn rate that we've found for OTT services in our Q3 results is 44% of people opting to churn away within, I guess it's the past 12 months is the survey sample. So churn is top of mind always for OTT services, and churn is always inherently going to be higher for OTT services compared to traditional pay TV. And that's partially because of the ease of cancellation, ease of switching, and ease of subscription that come with OTT services. And so it's always top of mind because services are always concerned that there's a potential loss of subscribership. And so engaging is crucial, not just having content to bring people in, but using content to maximize how well they stay, right? Maximizing that retention. So we're looking forward to a bit more on sustaining engagement throughout the subscriber journey from our panel to come. And we are about to cut in. Did you know that 69% of US broadband households have used at least one type of online streaming service in the past 30 days? Download our new webinar, How to Build a Winning OTT Strategy, Balancing Content and Platforms in collaboration with Bitmovin. Opportunities and challenges fill today's landscape for streaming video services. A greater number of consumers than ever before are consuming OTT video with a corresponding jump in variables that impact the user experience. Different types of content consumed on different types of devices by different customer segments. In this competitive market, delivering a streaming video service to market quickly with the high quality of experience consumers now expect is crucial. The threat of churn is ever present. Switching services is easy and retention is difficult. This webinar explores the challenges of meeting this diverse mix of expectations across varying content types, audiences, and customer segments, and best practices in addressing them. Join us as we discuss the multiple variables across content types, platform preferences, and consumption patterns that OTT providers must consider. Download the webinar now to receive insights on how companies can accomplish their target time to market while still addressing all of these factors.
Great. So welcome back. Sorry for a little technical trouble. I think Gabriel maybe has lost power. So that might be a first. We're going to bring him back. Hopefully his power is going to get fixed there. And however, I'd like to go ahead and move forward. We're going to bring Jenna with Delta Tray to our virtual stage and continue the conversation. So I'm really excited to welcome her today. And again, my name is Elizabeth Parks. I'm the president of Parks Associates. And these are the last sessions that Parks is hosting this year for our executive conferences. And we are, incredibly excited to talk about what's happening in the OTT space as it relates to video engagement strategies. Delta Tray is a leading sports and entertainment technology provider specializing in fan-first experiences. So we're going to talk to Jenna today, really understanding some of her past experience, what we're seeing as a result of the pandemic with customer acquisition and capturing the consumer with a very fragmented market. Specifically talking about sports and some of the related activities that we're seeing, new things like NFTs and, really an extension of the players' social habits and activities and be able to create new experiences for consumers in this area, a very loyal fan base. So Jenna, thank you so much for being here today. I'm really excited to talk to you. Let's go ahead and start and see if you can give a quick introduction of some of your past work experience and then the role that Delta Tray is currently playing in today's market.
Sure. First of all, thanks for having us here today. I will say you mentioned Los Angeles earlier, and we're jealous of our weather. We've had rain in the last 24 hours, which has meant that a lot of our networks have gone down. And it really kind of goes to the fact that the foundation of engagement is technology. And Delta Tray has kind of built our business on that. We are over 1,020 offices around the globe, and we're the business of helping sport, media, and entertainment organization build those solutions for fan engagement through technology, strategy, and design. We work end to end, from kind of glass to glass, production to distribution, all the way to consumption. And we really believe that this is the rise. We're really in the era of kind of the rise of the fan. And even more so that the fans are fans 24/7. And we have been focused, I think, as an industry to date on really getting them into the game. And fans are really looking to be part of the part of their engagement with both teams and players 24/7. And the pandemic has accelerated a lot of the adoption of the trends that we're seeing. And a lot of the stuff that we were talking about earlier around churn and around adoption of new services, the key question now is how do we keep them? How do we attract them, retain them, and keep them part of it? And I think part of it is that we're seeing a shift right now to the control of the consumer, and a shift from almost the fan to a membership model. I have worked, before I joined Delta Tray, I have worked across the kind of the ecosystem of digital, and looking at kind of digital transformation across publishing, gaming, storytelling, content creation. And I think what's really exciting about sport right now is we're seeing that convergence happening as gaming, gambling, e-commerce is coming into play, as well as the rise of video games and gamification into how we interact and engage with sports, which is, at the end of the day, we believe, kind of the religion of modern day. It includes all of those stories of kind of heroes versus villains and mythic and epic battles, and the passion that is included in all of us around our teams and around the players, and that connection that fans or really members want to have directly, and that connection. And I think now that technology through social and through the platforms that we're creating at Delta Tray enable that one-to-one connection.
Well, that was an amazing oversight in terms of looking at everything that's going on in the market. And certainly we see these different areas overlapping and creating new experiences as a result of the technology that's there. Let's talk a little bit about how the world changed for sports. So, everything is different now, and I think it's going to remain different, pretty much forever. Everything is forever changed because of the pandemic. There is no real new normal. It just is the new way things are going to be. So are there certain things that happened as a result of the pandemic that have just created these explosive new business models? And can you maybe give us a few examples of some of the things you saw in the last 18 months that we probably would never have even imagined could have come together, but technology has made it happen?
Well, I think first, all of us were, there was an emptiness, right, when we couldn't watch sports. I mean, I'm wearing my WNBA shirt today, and like when we all had to go into the wubbles or bubbles, like waiting to see if we were able to see our favorite players play. It was a question of like, is sports over? But the passion doesn't stop. And so I think providing other ways of engagement for consumers is the key thing. And it's not just about, the business model has been really focused on, I think for team owners and for rights holders, has been around the season. But as I mentioned earlier, like we are fans all year long, 365 days a year. So I think the key focus is around how do you attract and engage year round. One of the things we're doing on Game Pass International is that, first of all, we have content and storytelling and rights that are available nowhere else. So we have to attract that consumer and give them something they can't find anyplace else. And the next thing is to engage with them and give them something different. A part of that is that white space content, exclusive interviews, behind the scenes, things that go beyond the game to really understand the players, the fans, the community, and what they're doing both on and off the court. And then I think, we've had a business model that has resulted around like rights holders or ticket sales, and we're seeing that the consumer wants to participate. This is kind of the promise of Web3. Web2 was about kind of a lean back experience, and in the Web3 world, consumers want to be part of the game. They want to interact and they want to participate, and that means they're going to be participating not only in kind of content creation and community development, but also in how they're spending money. So they want that control and that choice. And we're going to see a lot more of consumer revenue play into how both sports teams and sports rights holders monetize what they're capable of. We've seen this acceleration into e-commerce, gambling, which has kind of been based on like fantasy gaming mechanics, and then collectibles. And I think the biggest story that people have been talking about in the last year is kind of like the rise of NFTs and what we've seen through NBA Top Shop, where you can effectively kind of own a piece of the game. And the NFL is rolling this out as well. But I think the consumers are desperate to be engaging not only with with other fans, as well as their players and their teams. And part of that is to give the consumers choice and how they're engaging in different aspects. So I think that what's not necessarily that we're having new business models, but the business models are starting to catch up with consumer behavior and what they're looking forward to do with their passion, with what they're passionate about. And I think the key thing for what we do at Delta Tray and what I think is important in the industry is how we're using tech to connect all these different aspects. We are engaging across multiple platforms, whether it's our mobile devices or OTT, or even in just kind of the lean back experience on TV. But in order to use that data and join those data dots so that we can understand what kind of consumer behavior is we're seeing across those platforms and serve up opportunities for those fans to connect across that ecosystem.
Yeah, you've got so many good points there, and it truly is a sort of an Uber world, and consumer expectations have really changed, especially in the last 18 months. The reliance on technology and connectivity, and this idea that you can, watch what you want when you want, find out all sorts of information about things as an added experience to it is really important. I want to get back to NFTs, but before we go there, let's talk about this direct to consumer model here that is going to continue expanding, where groups will be looking directly for that subscription payment coming from a consumer. And as you noted, this is moving well beyond just a ticket sale with one game or even season passes. It speaks a lot to the role of partnerships as well, because these experiences can only get created as a result of that sports entity. Then you have the players, and then you have the extension there coming directly from the player to create the experience. So are there any particular partnerships that you might highlight that are doing this in a way that's really compelling and able to capture the consumer eyeballs, really?
Well, I think, we partnered earlier in this year with LiveLike, and I believe that Mihir, the CEO, is also somewhere out there in the ether. What we did with LiveLike in our Diva player is really focus on interactivity and gamification. So we can integrate, once we have that relationship with the consumer, we can integrate kind of that interactivity, live quizzes and polls, influencer chats, sentiment analysis, and give the consumer kind of that customized view of their fan experience. I think regarding partnerships in general, I mean, we're seeing a lot that's possible with the rights holders to engage across the ecosystem and really partner with their fans, to be honest, about kind of creating that content and have brands kind of in the middle of things. Like if you'll see, like we'll see which is the launch recently with Turner Sports. They've created a golf game, and looking at how brands can accelerate kind of consumer behavior. So if fans perform actions on social media or promote games or share highlights or bring their community into kind of the direct to consumer app, like they can be rewarded for that through brand partnerships. I think the sponsorship model and how like Fortune 100 brands play in this will continue to evolve as well, as well as the kind of technology partners and enable that and facilitate that connection.
Yeah, and it really is a fragmented market for the consumer. I mean, there's just so much coming at an individual to try and decide maybe where they're going to spend their money, what they're going to watch, or what they want to do in the future. And it really speaks to that challenge for providers on consumer engagement. It used to kind of all be centered around the television or the newspaper. Those are the two places you're trying to capture the consumer. And now we've got this very multi-dimensional world. And there's just so many areas that have to be paid attention to get that consumer and then the willingness to pay. So can you speak to how technology is enabling sort of on the back end side, this new role of interactivity and be able to really expand reach in the multi-dimensional world that we now live in?
So I come from like the Gen X world, and it was a kind of a lean back, the idea that you could have multiple, like actual choice on TV. Gen Z is an entirely different demographic, and that is the largest demographic and rising demographic. And many people will say Gen Z doesn't have like an attention span to watch a full-length game. And they'll just watch highlights, which I think is an important thing for a lot. And, you know, we make sure that we can utilize technology for highlights. But I think the reality is it's not about an attention span. It's about where they're putting their attention. And we're seeing generally that Gen Z is doesn't identify as sports fans, but they identify as gamers. If they have to do anything to identify themselves, which they don't really like to do. And video games have become the fastest growing and like the dominant form of media. And the thing about video games is that it requires your attention. And that is the focus. Like if a child can be spending 10 hours a day on Roblox, they'd be happy to, if you would allow them. So I think what we're starting to see is the rise of gamification in an interactivity within our technology. So we are creating opportunities for that engagement. And we're seeing through the use of data, if fans are logging out, how can we target and serve them certain things? How can we create challenges for them and previews to drive, more time in app? And how do we create, the integration of gaming, quizzes, and interactivity? And I think part of that is, fantasy football and fantasy games in general have operated on a separate platform. And how can we start to integrate where video viewership becomes like a game? And we know that, there's going to be a variety of people within the same app. So how do you create that choice so you can accommodate kind of the Gen Z digital natives who want that type of engagement and interactivity with the Gen X people who might want more of the lean back experience? And I think part of that is creating challenges and hooks, knowing how consumers operate within the app or within the streaming service to drive that engagement based on their demographics. For example, women, we see there's a great company out of Boston who's on the Fan Project. They really love to come in and consume content. We're seeing content and storytelling as kind of the highest form of engagement opportunity. So prior to a game, they want to learn about the players. They will go in a week before the game, in many cases, to look at the backstories, understand someone like Nneka Ogwumike. What is she like on and off the court before I start to watch that WNBA game a week later? And so I think understanding both gender differences, demographic differences, and utilizing technology to serve up that interactivity. It's not just about a transactional subscription as well. And I think finding ways to create kind of that connection, not only between the rights holders and the consumer who is purchasing it, but also creating opportunities for communities to develop within that platform.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you brought up that idea of communities and really these storytelling activities really building around, maybe a live event, but that's creating an opportunity for people to come ahead of the live event and following the live event and leading up until perhaps the next, live event is occurring. Right. And so, we see that in the B2B business world as well, with in-person events. I don't think Parks Associates will ever just hold in-person events. We will forever be doing virtual now that we have been able to make it work out. We're also dedicated to being back in person. But again, we, just like everybody else, is looking to our customers to meet them where they're at. If they want to be in person, we'll be there. And if they want to be virtual, we'll be there too. But this idea of engagement is so important, and technology can also enable that real-time engagement, like as it's happening. Can you explain how Delta Tray, is impacting that particular aspect of where things are at now with consumer engagement strategies?
Well, I think quite simply, we have our Access and Diva players who kind of work as an ecosystem and work with clients like across the globe. So with BT Sport, we're providing live stats, interactive timelines, 360 viewing, so you can have that choice. Again, with our Live Like partnership, we're able to create kind of influencer chats and sentiment analysis and bring people together, and enable communities. I mean, I think sports in its core is very tribal, and rather than having a second screen experience, we're integrating that within the core experience for our rights holders. But I think, there's a lot of buzzwords and C words, control and choice and community. I think the thing about community is that it is, and the promise, I think, of kind of the Web3 world is where we're headed, is that it can be a one-to-one and kind of a two-way conversation with the rights holders, and it can be a one-to-many conversation with the community, and the opportunity to bring your friends and connect with other fans and other kind of people who are passionate within the app experience is going to be increasingly important. And I think, we've seen companies like Socios, create those kind of fantasy experiences with games and the ability with teams and the ability to kind of vote on things and interact. This enabled through blockchain and NFTs. I think we're at the very early stages of what that means. And, we're working across the ecosystem of sport and with our strategy and design team, helping facilitate what does that mean for these sports rights holders to create those communities and that engagement. On one end, we have kind of the Kraus DAO who's saying, like, we want to buy a team, and how getting people together to how can we sort of interact around different ways to watch the game, different ways to engage, and reward and delight fans through that community and community engagement.
Yeah, and that brings up this the NFTs. Let's pause and talk a little bit more for our audience and explain what that is. But I do want to throw out a few Parks Associates stats just as a reminder for our audience. Our research of 10,000 broadband households is tracking that 8% of consumers engage in fantasy sports, 10% are engaged in sports betting, and about 30% of broadband households have a sports OTT service. So I just want to make sure that our audience has an idea about the millions of people. Around 1% of all broadband households is about a million, if you want to just round off the numbers. So 8 million broadband households that are playing fantasy sports. But let's get back to this concept and of NFTs and what that means. And so, Jenna, I'd love for you to maybe if you could just give a brief explanation of what are we really talking about here for those who may not be familiar with this.
Well, I think there's a lot of buzzwords flying around right now, and I think sports and the art world have definitely adopted the Web3 kind of world faster than many other places. And so I think really the promise of Web3, and I'm going to borrow someone else's definition of this is Chris Dixon, partner at A16Z, who said, Web 1 is really about reading the web. Web 2 has been about reading and writing. And there has been we see kind of with Facebook and Twitter, there's kind of an Apple and the big tech giants. There's someone in the middle of that conversation. Web 3 is really the opportunity for consumers to read, write, and own the web. And that is enabled through blockchain technology. And so basically I see the NFT world and the world of sports is around that transition from a fan to a member. So it's less transactional and more participatory. And it's saying, I belong to this team. It's like, I'm not just a fan in the stadium or sitting in the audience. Like, I am part of this. I'm part of this team. And what does that mean? It means I can be part of the team in the way that or the league or a player in the way that I own certain content in the way of NFTs through NBA Top Shot, or I am a member of a ecosystem of team ownership or kind of team participation, which is enabled through Socios. And we'll see kind of the evolution of that. I think we're really in the early days of what this could mean. I mean, most team owners are the billionaires club of the world. And this is a chance for consumers to really become members and go beyond the fandom into membership into that team environment. And I think that we'll see that through blockchain and kind of smart contracts, we can create different types of fan experiences based on your behavior and based on your participation and kind of your level of fandom. In the same way, in games, you can level up. I think through NFTs, you'll be able to have special access, whether it's being on the field with Tom Brady or having chance to get different tickets or different e-commerce experiences that are enabled through kind of your expression of fandom. And I think for rights holders, what we can do on a technology platform is really understand at Delta Tray who is engaging with content, who is spending more time in app, who is sharing content out into social, into their community. And so we'll be able to facilitate that kind of promise of the smarter NFT, which is effectively rewarding you to be members. When I was younger, I was part of the Dodger Blue Wrecking Crew, and you got a piece of paper in the mail and maybe some access. I think this is really supercharging what membership feels like within both teams, and I think you'll start to see it with individual players as well.
Yeah, sure. It's like creating a lot of engagement, but the consumer maybe doesn't even, realize that. And I think that's what the idea of gamification is all about, is you get somebody to do something, they don't know you're trying to get them to do something, and they're happy to do it. I
don't know that it's a trick. I think that the new fan really wants to participate in this way. They are super fans of, I'm based in LA, so if it means promoting certain things that the Dodgers are doing or the Rams, like that is something I'm doing naturally on social media with my friends. If it's fantasy, I'm already engaging with my friends in an app. So I think it's rewarding the consumer for the stuff that they're already doing. And that's really exciting because it's not about tricking them. It's saying you're doing these things, and we are able to track that through technology and reward you for those behaviors. And
that's
really exciting.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's like an investment, people care. And so then they have a willingness and want to kind of dive deeper. It's interesting if we look at the smart home space and look at energy management and smart thermostats, this is something the utilities are putting into consumers' homes to try and be able to help control the energy that's, being used and, essentially have less energy on the grid as a result. And so, that idea of energy savings and consumers being an active participant in reaching that goal. And I think on the sports side, with the way there's so much loyalty and experience that's driving, consumers to want to do exactly what you're saying, to learn more. It brings up this Web 3.0 brings up, and NFTs bring up the idea of the metaverse. This is another big word that's around these days, and Facebook, changing its name to metaverse. But what do you think this is going to do for the sports world? Seems like there's a lot of opportunity, especially in the experience side. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts around the metaverse and sports.
Well, I think we're at really early days around this. I think obviously the pandemic accelerated a lot of these things where we couldn't be in venue for a lot of games. So how does that change what the nature of fandom looks like? And we're also seeing the global fan. It's not just about your local place being like just because I'm in Los Angeles doesn't mean that I can't be a fan of something in the UK or beyond. So how do we engage, in a virtual way? I do think that, there are some companies that are emerging like Green Park Sports, which creates fan communities in the metaverse. I think we'll start to see, as I mentioned earlier, like the DAOs around Kraus, about team ownership. And I think teams will be pushing to find ways to engage their community outside of gameplay. And I think also with Web3, what you're going to see is that fans will organize themselves. And I think that is kind of the promise, and how that interacts with kind of the team owners and rights holders, I think is yet to be determined. But I think we are already engaging in many ways on the metaverse right now. It's just the early days of what that is. Obviously, nothing really compares to being in stadium and what that experience feels like. But we're seeing new technology from Clippers Court Vision to what we're doing with DAZN. And I think there's ways for the consumers to kind of, I think we're all going to be in the metaverse in some ways. And I think we're going to kind of go in and out between kind of the reality of the real world to the metaverse. I think what this means is, how do you create kind of the fandom experience? I think we're seeing some really exciting innovations outside of sport right now. A company called Wave XR, based in Los Angeles, that is doing concerts. They did Justin Bieber, they did The Weeknd, and they're creating different types of experiences. It's not just about creating the in-game experience for the comfort of your home. It's about, how do you create a new experience around the fan, interacting with the other fans in the community, as well as that artist or team. So I think I'm excited to see what's going on next. I wish I had a definitive sense. I think we're going to start to borrow from, what we're seeing across the ecosystem and other types of forms of entertainment that we can bring into this space. But I think what we've seen is a bit of an evolution of, beyond what we're seeing now is that teams are now more willing, as well as leagues, to go kind of beyond the game. So they're creating opportunities like being in the locker room, having audio. And I think a lot of those tools and kind of access will come into the metaverse and kind of virtual communities that we hang out in together.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a lot of these sports players people look up to, and they want to understand, how did you get into this position of greatness? And, consumers really, really love that. So, Jenna, it's amazing how 30 minutes can go by so quickly. And I really appreciate your time today. I do have one final question before we go. So this is a question from our audience. And so if you could share a little bit more about how vMPVDs are addressing sports streaming rights. This is a challenging time on the rights management. So any comments on that for 2022 and what's to come?
I mean, I think with sports streaming rights, I think we're seeing just a proliferation of them around the consumer being able to watch in many different places. And I think it's challenging to kind of manage rights on a regional basis. And one of the things that we have at Delta Tray is the technology to enable that and make sure that we're aligning kind of location with kind of the couch rights. I think eventually this system will have to be transformed. I mean, consumers, regardless of where they're located in the world and which device that they're going to be on, are going to want to watch content. So I think that's what you're seeing in the form of churn and just consumer choice. And I think so we're going to go through that evolution of where the consumer's in the power seat to be able to watch where they want, when they want, how they want it. And I think, we're seeing that the model shift. So to be able to buy a la carte, to be able to buy highlights, to be able to buy one game. And I think flexibility in pricing is going to be key for the rights holders and the distributors of that content. And then I think for the consumer, I think making sure that they can deliver on that promise to watch whenever they want, or they're going to find alternative ways to kind of sneak around this. I think for the rights holders, making sure that you have the technology and DRM, and I think that's obviously where Delta Tray specializes in being able to manage that across the ecosystem, to understand and authenticate users based on the rights holders and what they have across the United States and internationally as well.
Absolutely. Well, Jenna, that's going to have to be the last word, but I want to thank you for your comments today and for Delta Tray's support of Future of Video, a powerhouse technology player. Thank you so much for being here. And we'll be right back and bringing Gabriel Berger, the CEO of Think Analytics, back to our stage for his visionary presentation. Thank you again for joining us.
And we have Gabriel Berger, the CEO of Think Analytics, with us. Gabriel, welcome. We'd love to hear your perspective on engagement from your point of view, based on your experience, and also from the Think Analytics point of view.
Sure. No, I appreciate it. And by the way, under the category of man plans, God laughs. So sorry about that, everybody. We have a bit of weather here in LA. It's not always perfect, and it certainly wasn't yesterday or today. So, of course, all my power completely blew out, and thankfully, I'm able to join again. So I want to thank everybody. Thanks, Paul, and thanks for Parks Associate for inviting me here to speak. The subject really is about churn, and we're going to deal with that. It's a very, very complicated issue, and there are many signals and facets to it. First of all, it all begins with the content. It always has been, it always will be. That's it. But I think Eric Schmidt said it really well. If content is king, context is its crown. Context is all about having content find the right people, or the right people find the right content. So that really is the difference between search and the difference between recommendation. And it'll always be that way. And what you do is that you got to go with the army you got right now. We're in a very interesting business right now as where we are as an industry. So if you are a product person, or you're the person that is the chief revenue officer of an SVOD service or a direct-to-consumer OTT service, you're presented with, here's the content, here's the business model, here's the UI, make it work. That's your charge. And how they keep score could be a lot of different ways, but usually it's revenue and it's growth, and it's tied into that. And to make it real growth, that's one of the problems we're facing. There are a lot of free trials. There's a lot of things you can do. There are a lot of gimmicks you can do. They're all very, very well thought out and paid for. But eventually that cost of acquisition or the cost of retention, how many levers do you have? So when you take away the content, the business model, and the UI, what are you left with? Well, you're really left with the ability to leverage curation, AI, and merchandising of all these different shelves. If you have a great UI like Delta Tray does, and they'll provide that for you, that's great. But the one thing you probably have the most autonomy on is to merchandise and get the right content in front of the right people. So when we think about churn, we think about it through the lens of content discovery. And churn has a couple of different types of feelings to it, right? There's the let's prevent it. Let's prevent it. And how do you prevent it? The currency of prevention of churn, as far as the lens that we look into it, is engagement. So that's the number one thing, to make sure that that experience is going extremely well. The other part is to monitor signals that are showing and surfacing a risk data point, if you will. Now, some things are direct signals and some are indirect signals. There are all types of signals. A bad streaming quality of service issue is a signal. A big signal would be a credit card expiring. Either that customer has forgotten about it or has intentionally let it expire. That's a signal. So those are signals that maybe a product person wouldn't really at this time have some sort of feeling with. They just don't really deal with that much, and maybe getting that information to them may take a bit of time. So let's look about what they can really move the needle on. And the challenge really is to look through the signals of engagement. And frankly, it's not always going to be good news. So that's also the key, to see danger and be able to act accordingly. So what I want to do is give you a little bit of background about our company and how we look at overall content discovery and how that moves the needle on engagement. So we've been around for a while. It's interesting. We started off more in the data mining business and have gone in that progression of data mining to machine learning to AI. And in the beginning, it was all about predicting things. And it wasn't about predicting content back in the day. It was about predicting mean time between failures in a certain part of a battleship or a ship. but it really laid the groundwork of what you need is proper data mining, proper machine learning, and leverage AI. AI is not a mystified thing for us. We call it Wednesday. That's what we do. As we got more into the media business over the last 10 plus dozen years, we've now become the most deployed discovery platform in the world alongside Netflix and Amazon. And when we say that, we mean premium content, the number of languages we serve, and the number of countries that we serve, and also the number of recommendations we're surfacing in those countries and regions. So we're a very international company, which is extremely important. If you look at the United States, we're 4% of the world's population, obviously. That's about it. And if you look at then your own viewing habits, think about all the content that's always gone out of Hollywood, but think of all the content now coming in. So the world's changing. And if you look at a lot of these OTT enterprises, all their growth patterns are really about, and growth plans, it's really all about internationalization. It also takes pretty much of a village to make things work, right? You just have to have more than recommendations. There's a whole customer lifecycle management, which includes editorial, the proper UX engine, who's doing the business rules, who's looking at all these analytics. Remember, my company isn't called Think Recommendations or Think Search. It's Think Analytics. And more specifically, it's about insights, actionable insights that you can really bring to the table. So what you need to do is take all those machine learning experiences, all the algorithmic techniques that have been used over a very large swatch of 80 plus customers that you learn about, get to market quickly, and then also have a proven ROI that you have KPIs that you can really work against. And I think this is really important to say, because one of our challenges as a business is that a large swatch of our customers and the content providers, video providers, they're making this pivot from wholesale to retail, to direct to consumer, while at the same time sustaining a robust business model. That is an arduous forklift. That ain't easy. And so it takes a whole different crew to work this. And frankly, 10 years ago, a lot of this was decided by a bunch of data scientists. And while they're still extremely important to the equation, now you're putting the hands into the business people, and they have a charge and they have a number. So you have to be able to keep up the data science, but at the same time, put this in the hands of people that are going to start working the different knobs and dials, which we'll get into. And I think you'll hear this as a commonality throughout the day. One of our biggest challenges, I think, as a media and entertainment industry is scale. So we are surfacing about 6 billion recommendations a day. We're doing this with these 80 customers. We have a very swatch of 400 million viewers that we're touching. As I think everybody's mentioned, and I think Paul and Jenna have mentioned this, device awareness is really important. So to have those 1 billion devices that we are being able to detect where those signals are coming from and where we're giving messaging to, that's a very big variable as far as how we surface content to the right person at the right time. So with these 80 customer deployments, you have a really robust AI-powered solution that's leveraging all these learnings from all these global record engines that are out there. So that speaks to scale, and that's a wonderful thing, and that's great. But scale can be measured not just with volume, but with velocity. And this is also a very important thing. Jenna mentioned, I think, rather adroitly, what's going on in the world of gaming and gambling and sports. Things happening much faster right now. Like case in sports or fantasy sports, someone gets injured, this changes your fantasy team. Maybe that changes your recommendation of what you're going to show that customer. It all kind of intertwines. Speed is important. Speed is also the pace of the actual supply chain. It's really shrunk dramatically, really moved in terms of compressing the supply chain in COVID with the circumvention of theatrical release and kind of putting a sugar rush into a lot of OTT systems of these theatrical titles. that's a supply chain issue. But also, as you are looking at things like churns and signal, to be able to basically continuously refine and give a high fidelity of a viewer snapshot, that requires speed. So the days of taking information that was more wholesale and is now you're in the business of retail, that's a pretty big deal. Also, it's going to take a village here to solve curation. It's not just something that runs by its own inertia. So when we look about it as the nexus of information science and data science to really know thy customer as best you can. So that includes taking in these algorithms, and we have our own algorithms, but we're certainly not getting into any kind of algorithmic wars. That serves no purpose. If you want to ingest Amazon Personalized, for instance, who we work very closely with, or your own algorithms, you feed it into there, and we have an entire framework that really makes this an actionable business to then take that information and get viewer insights, and at the same time, start doing A/B testing, which is really we don't do a lot of right now in our business. By the way, in other businesses, they do. In the retail business, they do. At Costco, they do. At Home Depot, they do. They have an enormous amount of knowledge about all this in A/B testing. That's why at Costco has infinitely less inventory that they display to you on their physical shelves. But at the same time, they have a lot of insights as to why those particular shelves are being occupied by those particular products. So to be able to A/B test and say, hey, I want to test out this scenario at 2, 3, 4, 5% of my population, see how it goes, test it, and to be able to iterate and learn very fast, that's important. Then all the other things that go with it, to be able to do editorial campaigns, that's also very important. And then you get into this linchpin. And the linchpin is really all about the metadata curation and the enrichment. So this is where we take our viewpoint of the merging of information science and data science. This is extremely important. It's all about content intelligence. So Disney, Warner, Netflix, or Warner Discovery, they're going to spend about $70 billion in content. That's what the street tells us. So it begs the question, how much are they investing in content intelligence, their own awareness of the content, what's going on? We think this is the real linchpin here. To be able to take, and we've done this now for over 3 million different pieces of content, to enrich content that provides semantic connections between those content, merge that with the algorithms, and then that's what drives personalization. To be able to weight each piece of content and have the situational awareness about that content, combining with viewer behavior, gives you really how you start targeting personalization that's real and meaningful. And what we do is that we work with some great customers like Gracenote and Rovi or Redbee. They have root metadata, which is a story arc. It explains it very quick narrative editorially of what the movie's about. It's got a runtime of 120 minutes. It's in 4K HD. It's in Spanish. That's what you get. What we do is then below the line, if you will, augment and enrich that metadata. So you're creating semantic connections and a bit of understanding about the nature of that content. Because Bruce Willis in Die Hard may be an action movie, that's true. Is it like The Expendables? Is it like another movie? There's a lot of gradation and weighting that goes on to really be able to have the nuances of these different types of content. So what it does is enable you to vector correctly to that specific customer or customers. And we also do this also with image personalization. It's funny, when you talk about image personalization, you ask somebody, what is the criterion that you select, why you're going to watch something? This is a very insidious, interesting subject in that most people don't mention the artwork, but in point of fact, it has a very, very big difference in generating interest and engagement. So you may have one window in theatrical, but then the stars of that movie, their popularity increases in the VOD window over a period of time, or they're doing another movie. You can make that more personalized, either by curation or personalization. And then most of our business is really about content discovery, recommendations, how we use AI and how we use machine learning. Now, I'm not going to go through all this list here, but you have an enormous amount of different ways you can go about this. And that's the key here, is where you start. And where you start is somewhere, because the learning happens in milliseconds. And that's the other thing. Again, where are we as a business? Where are we? Retail has done this for years. We now have to add this kind of content discovery into the picture. And then search. Search is something that kind of gets glossed over and assumes it's all the same. It's not. And it's really important. So if someone is searching for something that's binge worthy, you better make sure that it's not expiring at midnight. Or what you're seeing more and more with something called broken search is, you in this era of takedowns and content companies siloing their content. Well, that could be a problem. If you want to alienate somebody and create a signal of churn, recommend something they can't watch. But if you do it right, you'll see on the right here, you have a lot of great little signals that show that you can really move the needle on engagement here. Because how we measure everything simply is usually, did they take the recommendation and how many hours were viewed? It's simple, but not easy, but those are two very good indicators that things are going well. So then you get into, hey, we do 6 billion recommendations a day. Okay, that speaks to your ability to spin up different instances. Great. You can handle scale. You're never down. You have self-healing. You have all those things in place. That's great. But how are we doing? How do you know how you're winning? Well, there's all sorts of metrics, but usually the one is conversion. Did someone take a recommendation? And if they did, when did they take it? In the first 5 minutes, in the first 24 hours? Are viewers seeing relevant recommendations as a driving engagement? Are you upselling anything? And if you are trying to upsell something, is the self-provisioning mechanism in place to do so? How much of what content is being viewed across all content libraries? So to have that ability is just extraordinarily important. And then it all leads into what we're talking about, which is churn. So churn is about one thing, really, when you think about it. It's about loyalty. That's what it's really all about, is loyalty. And how do you identify all the kinds of people that are going to come to the table that you have to identify? Whether it be binge viewers, snackers, people that come in for minutes at a time and leave, but come in frequently. So if they're coming in at a few minutes at a time, maybe recommending TV shows would be better than movies. Or conversely, if they are watching only movies that are not exclusive to you, can you get those movies elsewhere? That's another signal of churn. So there are all manners of signals. And this is what really is their biggest challenge, I think, as a business. Because you can always lower the price on something, that mitigates churn, but that's not a good proposition. How do you inflate the price to value relationship? How do you do that? And when we see the way you do it is through content discovery. So the mantra really is know thy customer. If you know your customer, you're going to be in good shape. You need to be able to predict things. Other signals could be things like, did they bookmark something? If they bookmark something, they're probably not churning that month, right? Also, as you look at the business, what's the definition of success? So if you're spreading more channels, right? Channel spreading on, let's say, all these fast channels that are emerging fairly robustly. If you can spread more recommendations over more of those channels and expose more ad inventory, that would be incredible. And then maybe that's a 5% conversion rate. If you are selling a movie that you are then telescoping to buying a pay-per-view event, and you've got a 20% conversion rate on that, i.e. they bought the pay-per-view event, well, you will be a very popular person in your company, I assure you. So know that customer. That's really important. Use the data. More and more, we talk to all content providers, whether it be movies, television. Most content has a story arc. Most content has all manner of different types of subjects to it. To unearth that is really important, which is why we go about 37,000 tags or facets deep on content to unearth the value and to make sure we're giving the customer the greatest experience possible. So that is my presentation. I look forward to any questions. And Paul, I guess I'll push it back to you.
Well, thank you, Gabriel. And, again, appreciate the insight there on some of what it takes to kind of meet the challenges of operating, you brought up a good analogy, at the speed of sports, right? At the speed of the streaming industry today, and really being able to deliver, focused, intentional, context-driven engagement, to the diverse subscriber and device landscape that's out there today among the viewer landscape. So I appreciate, again, your time. Unfortunately, we are cramped for time due to our prior technical difficulties that we experienced here. So again, we appreciate your time and your perspective here today. And we hope you'll join for the rest of our panel that you'll spectate here. And we've got a great panel discussion lined up on scaling services and consumer engagement strategies. And I'd like to launch into that and, essentially, once again, thank Gabriel for joining us. And we'd like to move to our panel discussion on consumer engagement strategies. And as part of that, I'm honored to present our group of panelists today. With us, we have Damian Reed from The Filter, Matt Smith from Symphony Media AI, Jeremy Strauss from Tastemade, Trent Wheeler from Gracenote, and I'll be moderating today's panel. So welcome, everybody. We're happy to have you here for this discussion. Thank you again for joining to really dig into how best to leverage user engagement at the scale relevant to video services today. And a quick reminder for our audience, please submit your Q&A questions for the panel through Swapcard as they come up while we're speaking, and we'll dive right into them at the end during our Q&A portion. And before we start, we'd like to have each of our panelists introduce themselves and tell us a bit about themselves and what they do in their roles at each of their companies. First up, we have Damian Reed, CEO of The Filter. Hi, Damian. Thank you for joining.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here. I'm in the middle of the countryside, so apologies if the Wi-Fi goes down, but it seems all right at the moment. I run a great little company here in the UK called The Filter. We do personalized recommendations on screen and in marketing. We've been going 15 years, and TV recommendations, OTT recommendations are right at the heart of what we do. We have some great clients in Germany. We have Join, UK. We have BBC's UK TV, and also in the States, Epix, who MGM service over there. And we really stand out in the market by offering much more of a managed service. The cliche that we use a lot is average recommendations. Mass-produced recommendations just don't cut it in terms of the quality that clients expect. Personalization is so important to the heart of many of these customer experiences. You can't just put up an algorithm and hope it works. So we really work closely with our clients doing A/B experiments and a lot of continual development optimization. We want to be seen like an in-house team for all our clients. That's kind of the mantra I try and steer the team towards here. So really excited to be on this panel. I'm looking forward to the questions and hopefully some questions afterwards. Thanks.
We're looking forward to it as well. Thank you. Joining us, we also have Matt Smith, VP of Business Development at Symphony Media AI. Matt, tell us a bit about yourself and your role at Symphony Media AI.
Hi, Paul. Good to see you again, and thank you, Parks Associates, for having me. Glad to be here today. I'm Matt Smith. I'm look after business development for Symphony Media AI. So there's my Twitter handle. Try to put out some good information there as I foray through the various and sundry bits of information in our industry. So a bit about Symphony AI, though. We are the leading provider of financial management services, and we're rapidly emerging as a leading provider of AI-powered technology solutions that really help to accelerate growth for the global media industry. We develop proven software solutions for revenue integrity and strategic revenue management across all distribution channels and deliver financial and audit insights for more than 90% of the US media industry. So we've had a legacy of providing really flawless audits for that part of the space. These days, we're talking more and more to media customers, distributors about the SaaS side of the business, right? And hearkening back to what Gabe said, I thought he had a great presentation, really data-driven answers to the questions they have today. So instead of making a decision about where a show should play on what service, in what region, where it might perform the best, we have data that can help them, arm them, and educate them so that they can make those smart decisions. And also look at how the audience engages with it, really forecast how the revenue is going to be driven up or down based on seasonality, based on sports. I hope we dive into that here in a few minutes. And we're happy to be here with our friends at Parks Associates. I want to lead off by saying there's a great bit of research. Well, they do great research in general, and we work with them together on a white paper that's out today. So if you go to the Future of Video website, it's right there at the top. You can download it. Some really good information there. We're very keen to get the audience to read it. So Paul, glad to be here today. Thanks again for having me.
Well, we're glad to have you with us as well, Matt. And again, to the audience, definitely check out that white paper that we've produced in conjunction with Symphony Media AI. Some really great insights there. And so joining us as well, we have Jeremy Strauss, Global Head of Business Development at Tastemade. Jeremy, welcome. Tell us a bit about yourself and Tastemade.
Sure. Paul, thank you for having me, and thrilled to join my fellow panelists. And thank you for Parks for putting this on. So Tastemade, we're a modern media company producing premium content across the food, travel, home design categories. And our approach to content has been really to distribute and monetize that content across a variety of different platforms. So at Tastemade's origins as a company, we're on social media. We're actually born out of the initial days of a YouTube content fund that started almost 10 years ago. And now that distribution has extended across every country around the world for the most part. We've got a TV streaming network, a lot of talked about here on this slide, and we're distributing that across a la carte subscription, so you can subscribe directly to Tastemade, get the linear channel as well as a very rich library of VOD content. You can get it as part of a bundle, so we're on a lot of services like Comcast and YouTube TV and others. And then you can also access that content in some form on free services. We're big believers in the fast space. And what we're looking to do is really reach audiences across different platforms and different monetization schemes that allow us to target different segments and their varying affinities for what we're paying a la carte, and allow us to really experiment and try to reach a broad audience as possible. And now we're excited to also announce that earlier this year we launched a creator platform where users will be able to subscribe directly to their favorite chef or culinary talent and access experiences and cooking classes and other things directly from that creator. So really empowering the creators and the makers, as we call them, in the culinary and DIY space to create their own direct-to-consumer subscriptions and monetize them on our platform and reaching the Tastemade audience around the world.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeremy. And our final panelist is Trent Wheeler, the SVP of Product for Gracenote. Thanks for joining us today, Trent. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and what you do at Gracenote?
Sure. Thanks, Paul, and thanks to Parks and everyone, all the fellow panelists today. I'm the head of video product for Gracenote. Gracenote is the #1 provider of entertainment metadata. And so our data is used to help drive discovery, to help people understand what content, what the overall kind of content landscape looks like, whether that's fast channels or streaming distribution. And we provide a very deep set of metadata to really help drive discovery and distribution overall. So it's great to be here. Our kind of position in between a lot of the content owners and then the content platforms gives us a very interesting position, right? We work to kind of build a normalized set of metadata that can be used by both the content owners as well as the content platforms. And so we work with just about every one of the large providers that there is. And so we can see, some of the real trends. I think we've added a tremendous amount of content in regards to new fast channels. We see the sizes of the streaming video catalogs as they increase. And it's been a really interesting position to watch all the changes and transitions from the, kind of a streaming video space. And I've probably been in this space for about 14 years or so at this point in time, and really excited to join this panel today.
Thank you, Trent. We're excited to have you with us as well. And thank you to all of our panelists for joining us. And we've got some really great perspectives there from all of you approaching the engaging topic from different angles of the industry. So let's launch right into this discussion by starting with a broad question. And I'm going to pitch this one to Jeremy first. When we look at subscriber acquisition in totality, like what do you feel are the biggest problems to solve today when it comes to driving better engagement to yield a paid relationship?
Sure. So I think that one of the biggest challenges we're facing today is just how to stand out in a very crowded marketplace. You kind of look at the evolution of subscription services, it's almost coming full circle. So for a while, there was the bundle approach of you would sign up for your cable operator and you would all access them across that platform. And I think services then got this tasted the allure of going direct to consumer, having a direct connection with that fan and that subscriber, and being able to monetize that audience directly while they're going through intermediaries. Everyone started their own subscription service, built on their own apps and so forth. And then particularly the non-Netflix's, HBO Max, Disney's, et cetera of the world realized that there was a lot of benefit to that bundled environment. It seems like we're now going a little bit of a return to, subscription services being bundled on common platforms rather than have it being disparate set of apps and services. And so for us is how do we stand out? There are myriad of services. There's a wealth of lifestyle content available on a variety of different platforms. And our approach has been, one, develop and create brand equity and build on that brand equity. So really having a Tastemade service that is filled with Tastemade original content and our unique voice being a key differentiator and a way to justify to users why they should pay for that content. And secondly is build out a robust offering around that content. As I talked about before, we've now launched a creator platform. The idea is we're also offering recipes and other utility around the content. The idea is trying to build a robust experience that differentiates us versus, all right, you can also get lifestyle shows on Netflix or Amazon or Hulu or HBO Max now. This is why our experience is different and why you should subscribe, because you're likely already a subscriber to those other services.
Well, very good points, Jeremy. I think differentiation is definitely top of mind today, especially in such a crowded landscape. And I think as part of that landscape, and we see this trend happening now where consumers are flocking to ad-supported services, whether they're AVOD or FAST services, are there ways to really leverage this trend when it comes to acquisition and engagement? And I think I'd like to go to Matt, Trent, and Jeremy for this one. Matt, what's your view on taking advantage of this trend?
Yeah, there's some pretty standard approaches today that you're seeing, Paul, and I think they're admirable by some of the behemoths, right? So HBO Max, with their ad-supported tier, with a limited library of content, hopefully pulling you upward into a broader library of content. Maybe there's only a couple of titles of a particular show that you like in the the ad-supported FAST model, and there's the entire library or several seasons of a show that you like. Very smart strategy there, as opposed to the drip strategy where you've got to wait till Friday or Sunday for that new episode. You're seeing something similar on Peacock, right, where you've got a couple different tiers that you can explore. Completely free service where the catalog's going to be limited, and then a couple of tiers where you get different volume of ad load. So that's another important point I'd like to make to the audience, or to at least the programmers in the audience, is as you're thinking about those different layers and those, pulling people upstream, while providing value, think about the ad load you provide to customers at those different price points. I've observed some really, name brand services who have a significant amount of ad payload or ad load rather at some of those given tiers. So I think those are common. And the other thing I'd point to is the libraries of sports content and how that is beginning to impact how these services expand or contract with subscribers, right? We can look at trends in the data and see seasonality where a season of UEFA football, soccer, whatever you want to call it, or the NFL can impact, you can see a curve across the service and where that revenue changes. We're applying AI and ML to it and helping the customer understand why those things happen. But those are a few examples of how I think some of these providers are beginning to look at adding FAST as an offering, hoping to maybe pull a limit or a smaller number, maybe not all, that's realistic number of subscribers upstream into more paid models.
Yeah, and I think taking advantage of seasonality is certainly going to be a method that needs to be employed more with the nature of that content, especially sports.
Yeah.
Trent, what's your view on maximizing the trend behind AVOD and FAST services right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think users have always loved, free ad-supported television. There's a lot of use cases for people who want to watch TV where, they want to watch something, maybe something familiar, it's an old favorite, and there's really great content on AVOD right now, and on some of the FAST channels. To echo what Matt was saying as well, I think sports in 2022 is going to be a huge push. A lot of the people have been kind of nervous about sports and streaming. We've seen initial, very kind of, exclusive deals where it's like one, NFL game on one particular time on one particular source. I think you're going to see most of the major sports providers, at least in the US, launching kind of, AVOD with really high quality content. That's going to make AVOD much more appealing and much more aware in terms of some of the FAST channels to an average consumer, right? Because all of a sudden they're going to find that the content that they really want to watch is on these channels, and you know what? They'll probably stick around for a period of time after that. So I think as well, obviously discoverability is key. I mean, we now track, Gracenote now tracks, I think something like 50,000 channels in the US alone. That is competition, right? That is not, I mean, obviously there's big brands that will continue to get some draw, but the competition for getting somebody to view your channel and then once they get there, stay in that channel means you need to have good content and users have to be able to find that content. And so making sure that the discoverability, is as easy and straightforward as kind of some of the traditional EPGs have been, is really going to help consumers to understand this model, understand, that there's great content for them and really grow it overall, because the price point is great for a lot of consumers, right? There's a lot of, there's a huge amount of content that's out there that people are very happy to watch. And are happy to watch the ads alongside with. And so it's a natural corollary to SVOD, and it hits a lot of preferences consumers have developed and have had for a very long period of time. So we expect to see a lot of growth with really sports being a large push in the next year here.
Yeah, and it's amazing even throughout all of the different trends in the industry. The one trend which is enduring for maybe into perpetuity is the immense amount of attachment that people have to sports content. Yeah. Right, as a subscription driver and as an engagement driver. So it's a very good point. Leveraging sports as essential. So I think the last person I want to weigh in on this one is Jeremy. Jeremy, what are ways that the industry can best leverage people's rising affinity for ad-supported content right now?
Sure. We at Tastemade, as I mentioned earlier, are strong believers in a modern media company can't just do one thing really well, it has to do several things really well. And so from our standpoint, we've heavily leaned in to ad-supported businesses and ad-supported environments. It's Tastemade's bread and butter. We believe that revenue stream will continue to grow overall as users increasingly flock to the services. The content on these platforms gets better. I think that's been a huge hindrance so far, is that you get a lot of catalog content that is several years old, even 10, 15 years old. And often what you see, particularly in the FAST space, is these services are kind of like the bastion of last resort, with users that gone on to Netflix, hasn't found anything, or gone on to HBO Max, Amazon, and so forth. And so I think that dynamic will start to shift as whether sports providers, as my fellow panelists mentioned, or other providers start to lean in more heavily with better content. I think from our standpoint, where we see the value is, one, just diversifying our revenue. As I talked about, there is ways to broaden the appeal to a variety of different segments who have different affinity for paying for content versus watching ads. Allows us to target those different groups rather than try to force everyone into one consumption behavior. And then secondly, it allows us to differentiate the products. And so if you want that lean back, just like linear content experience, all right, watch us on FAST and watch us on AVOD and engage with the ads. But if you want to go deeper, if you want access to the recipes and a little bit more utility, if you want access to our network of thousands of creators around the world, then that's something you're going to have to pay for. So it allows us to then differentiate the product offering and really segment the users based on their affinity and their willingness to pay based on the different product propositions.
Yes, and I think what's definitely helpful now is that, or especially for Tastemade and other services that are very reliant on the ad-supported sector, as how quickly FAST and AVOD, but especially FAST, are becoming a standard part of the experience on streaming device platforms, right? And whether that's going to be Google TV or the Fire TV experience, what have you, having access to free content is now becoming table stakes, and certainly raises, to use an overused analogy, like that rising tide raises all the ships in the fast sea, so to speak. So it's good to see that trend happening. I've got my next question here, which I think is tailor-made for Damien and Trent, and that's basically looking at personalized search and discovery. And what are the best ways to leverage search and discovery and recommendations together to really hook subscribers and potential subscribers as well, to ensure their engagement and satisfaction levels are consistently high?
Yeah, great question. Obviously, that is at the heart of what we do here at The Filter. We provide very, very personalized experiences for customers, down to, we look at exact viewing history, we match that, we do, a large, significant part of a user interface we believe should be personalized. And we track a whole load of metrics. And why that's important is clearly, customers, bottom line is they want to find something they want to watch very, very quickly. So one of the most interesting stats we track is time to find first play. So we can see when a customer comes onto a homepage, how long before they find some content they want to watch. And that makes a massive difference to their satisfaction levels. You can watch the correlation. It's very, very clear. So large elements of the user interface need to be personalized. And it's not just the recommended for you, the more like this, the because you've watched. Also, some of the created rails below that. A lot of services will have Christmas movies or sports themes or kids. And obviously, those different rails will appeal to different users. And you've got to make sure you personalize that whole experience, not just the rails. If you don't want to watch any sports content, there's no point in putting that rail anywhere near the top. However, the final point I will add is it's not just all about AI and machine learning. We strongly believe here at The Filter you need to work with editorial teams. I mean, the classic example is a service like Epix will be marketing a fantastic new original production, and it'll want to push that to all its users. So we have some tools that allow editors to get highly involved in the whole user experience. They can boost content. They can select a small pool of content. So it's not just all about AI, which is the heart of our company. It's also about leveraging the skills and the expertise of the editorial team that a lot of these companies have in-house.
To make sure that you augment AI, especially with its increasing use in the industry, with the qualitative editorial oversight that basically is the human factor, right? That can drive higher quality engagement. Trent, from your opinion, what are the ways that we can use search and discovery to ensure consistently high engagement?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, look, it's an incredibly competitive content market, right? There's more content that the average user is going to be able to browse at some particular time. And so users need services like search and recommendations to really help them. But that too then becomes competitive. We use the phrase a lot of video SEO. When someone is looking for a piece of content, there are competing services, there are competing platforms, competing ways of receiving that content. Do you want to join an SVOD platform? Do you want to get that content from AVOD? Foundationally, we believe, and again, just as Gabriel was talking about in the presentation before us here, that data is a foundational layer here. Of course, Gracenote is the #1 provider of kind of entertainment data, but what we do is really make sure that that helps that content to stand out. So we've offered a number of products over the years, including really detailed descriptors, video descriptors, personalized images, to make sure that when you're recommending a piece of content, you're recommending it not only because you think the user would like to engage with it, but you're merchandising it in a way that makes it really easy and accessible for them. They know the actor, they like fast-paced movies, and so the scene from that particular movie is fast-paced. Merchandising and kind of your storefront becomes really important in this kind of competitive market. And search and recommendations are the shelves, right? I mean, they're really the shelves that people are looking at to find the content. And so making sure you know how the platforms work. Every platform, we're still, I won't say early days anymore. We're definitely in kind of middle days, but the main platforms that have a lot of users have very different rules in terms of the way different, curation occurs. Different applications have different rules. And so understanding both in your own application and in the aggregation that you're in, how users are finding that content and what that funnel looks like, and that you are making sure your content looks as the best it possibly can when you have that user's attention for, as David was saying, a few seconds before they move on. You want to make it pop visually. You want to make sure that they see things in it that resonate with them, and that's really going to help you to get with your content over the 10 million other items somebody can watch on an average connected TV experience in the U.S. right now.
Yeah, and that's a good point. There's such a diversity in the device landscape and also in the types of platforms you're delivering to, because it's not just the latest and greatest. It's also all of those legacy devices and previous versions of platforms and everything that's out there. And the challenges are so diverse in being able to optimize that discovery experience. And it's something that has to be accounted for, right? Because there's an innumerable amount of man hours that could be spent covering all of that diversity. So I think the next question I'd like to ask for the panel, and this one is going to be really, it's a question for Matt and Damien. I think it's perfect. What role can AI and ML play in driving better subscriber acquisition, engagement, and conversion in today's market? And so, Matt, why don't you start off on this one?
Sure. Two of the most important tools that we have, they're kind of interconnected, but AI and ML, I think, are incredibly valuable today to help programmers and service operators do a couple of things. So we've already got a subscriber or even someone in a trial who's on a service, and they're identifying that a piece of content's resonating with them. You've heard some of my fellow panelists talk about this. So they're clearly watching a show. Let's take one and call them out as an example. They're watching The Sopranos on HBO Max, and they're binging it. They're over-indexing. So it's become clear that this user is doing a certain thing. And again, you heard earlier in the discussion about how D2C services have been clamored for so that the programmer has more granular information about the audience. They really know a lot more about their viewers than they ever have. So we may derive out of this experience that this viewer is a male. He's between the ages of 25 and 54. He's in the US, maybe even down to a zip code. So instead of doing some of these programming moves that have been part of the evolution of this industry, where we just say, okay, throw up another crime drama. We're using the data intuitively to say, the data says this, therefore we want to think about programming in this other fashion. So, using that data to drive the programming pieces of it, so that the UI is constructed as such so this viewer may engage with shows that they can also identify with or resonate with them. They may see The Wire, for example, or they may see Band of Brothers and say, those are exactly the shows I'm looking for. So you've had a successful content placement there. Further, you can use the AI and ML information to see, how that content is trending amongst the same demographic group in different regions. So there's a lot of different data planes that we can use for this. Conversely, if you look at this as a programmer and say, what content's really doing well with what demographic groups across what regions, those similar decisions can be made about not only programming, but then tying into the back-end marketing systems, so that instead of sending the new trial the new trial user, a generic email about, hey, every episode of another particular show on HBO has just been put up on the site, it may not resonate with that person, right? And you've had a missed opportunity. You might have much more specificity with the messages you're sending. And then as a programmer, you're looking at this content saying, what content is performing well on what service? So then when renewals come up, you're making intelligent decisions based on data to say, this content will or will not perform best on X, Y, or Z platform. So those are the primary reasons those are the primary use cases that we're seeing where AI and ML are really bringing value today to D2C services.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most exciting factors about AI and ML here is that because it's not just being used to drive smarter recommendations, right? Getting people in there to see the next thing that they might be interested in. The possibilities are very broad in terms of how it can reach deeper into marketing, messaging, subscribership, conversion. And so I think I'd like to hear a bit more depth on this from Damien. How can AI and ML really enhance, this entire subscriber journey, right? Acquisition, engagement, retention, and conversion.
I mean, one of the my team always tease me for using cheesy one-liners in the sales presentation, but one of the things we do say quite a lot is it's not really about the AI and the machine learning. The important thing to get right is what is the user journey, what are they going on? And we work with a lot of our clients. We actually co-create user interfaces, and we work at that level in terms of the input we get. So the key thing is to think through what is a customer's coming onto my service, they've never seen anything before. So the role that AI and machine learning plays there is, somewhat modest in terms of it's probably a discovery rail and not a lot else. However, when a customer has been on the service a number of times and they are in the middle of watching a TV series, we know exactly, or just come to the end, we know exactly what kind of content they've watched. The role of machine learning and AI is very, very powerful then, and we can recommend things to them. So it's not really about AI and machine learning per se. It's about thinking through what are the journeys my customers are coming to my service for, which is really, really important. I'll focus on acquisition and customer marketing a bit more as well. A lot of our clients are coming to us now and saying, hey, you guys at The Filter, you're doing our user interface recommendations. Can we not do that for our email or our push notification? And this works best for existing customers. And actually, we launched this product well over a year ago, and a couple of our clients are using it very successfully now. And this is driving people back into the user interface. And we know what time they watch TV. We know when they've got to the end of a TV series, what they've liked. And also, to my point earlier about editorial team, you normally work with the marketing team and say, okay, you guys pick 6, 7, 8 shows, and we'll just select the top 3 for each of your individual clusters and users. And again, another example of how we work with editorial rather than just on its own. So again, AI and machine learning is integral, I think, to all future experiences, but it's the experience that's important, not the AI. And you've got to match the journey to the experience. We developed for Join, our German client, recently, a basic mood selector. So you want a dark movie or lighthearted and stuff like that. And it's a very, very simple search product, really. It's slightly personalized, but not massively. And the role of AI was very modest in that, but it's been very successful because Join had thought through from the start, what is the customer experience we want? It was much more of a discovery one. So, it's horses for courses is kind of what I'm saying.
Well, it is very interesting, really understanding how to set the use of AI and ML up by understanding that journey, right? Understanding what mood they're in. It can be as simple as that, and how that influences the prediction that's happening. So I think that's a very interesting area as well. I'd like to cut away for a second to go to one of our audience polling questions, if we could pull up the first one here, and to see what all of you on the panel think about the results. So we asked the audience, in terms of the OTT customer journey today, what area do you think needs the most improvement? So their choices were conversion from free trials, maintaining high engagement levels, retention and churn prevention, subscriber acquisition, and other. So by far the top answer, the top result here, at 67% of respondents was maintaining high engagement levels is the area that our audience thought needed the most improvement in terms of the OTT customer journey today. And at a distant second, at 33%, was retention and churn prevention. And myself, I would have thought it would be retention and churn prevention, but overwhelmingly, high engagement levels is what seems to be in need of most improvement in the eyes of the audience. So Any of you on the panel have any reaction to this?
So that, I guess, Paul, that would imply that discovery is still a bit broken. I've had some conversations. In fact, Elizabeth and I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago on another webinar where, she said that she'll sit down and just scroll through an experience in search of that next TV show. But that experience was fulfilling to her. I think the average consumer finds the search and discovery piece of many of these providers to be at least sufficient. A Netflix, an HBO Max, a Hulu, a Peacock, as both a customer and a technologist, I find them to be okay. It's interesting though. I'm wondering if maybe the audience is, we've been trained a certain way, and sometimes those behaviors can be very ingrained toward the TV guide sort of model, which, for years we said had become boring and arcane and was the most difficult way to find content. So I wonder if the some of the other ways of discovering content are voice driven, which we've talked about as well in the last couple of weeks. And I think that's slowly growing in popularity. It's integrated into some of these smart TVs that are becoming so prevalent as the platforms for this. But very interesting results. I just wonder what the other side of that looks like, what the audience is expecting in terms of other aids and other tools to help them find content.
Matt, I think you brought up an interesting point. The EPG, which has been an element of television for decades, still seems to be the best way for users to discover content. We talked about the rise of FAST. The rise of FAST, interesting enough, I think was driven by two factors. One is subscription fatigue. I think users in particular were just, all right, forking enough more than when they subscribe to cable for subscription services on an a la carte basis. But then I think also users realize that there's just so much content being thrown at them that they just don't know what to watch. They don't know where to go. So I think what you're seeing is the recreation of that EPG experience. Google TV does a phenomenal job with this. Apple does a pretty good job of it with its Apple TV software. But I think it's really imperative for the device manufacturers to continue to lean into that, to really find ways to curate content at that moment that user is most likely to engage with that content, and really go beyond simply a algorithmic, which a lot of these services rely, a little bit of algorithmic and editorial content, almost do what like Spotify. Like, I'm shocked that no one has figured out how to create the Spotify video, that where you have a library of millions of songs that span decades and sometimes even a century of time, that they can find ways to create a compelling experience between playlists and following brands and watching or listening to what your friends, but no one's really figured out how do you adapt that for the video market. And yeah, it's different when you're listening to a 3-minute song versus watching a 30-minute episode, but I think the concepts are very similar. And I think that is really what this industry needs, is someone to kind of, how do you editorialize content in a way that when I come onto my device, whether it's for a 10-minute engagement, a 30-minute engagement, or a 3-hour engagement, the device kind of has that behavior anticipated and is already ready to present me with options that make it very seamless for me.
I think the other thing that also works really well about the EPG is, of course, people know how it works. And there's been a tremendous amount of innovation in this space, but not a lot of standards. And so you go to anyone's house and, you get any experience and, it's a different combination of remote controls, different features that work. And so people fall back on what they know and what they inherently kind of understand, right? And so really driving, I think, towards, standards. And you look at the different services, even the way they implement themselves on devices, there they strike different business development deals. There's promotion in some areas. There's not promotion in some areas. And again, it meets the B2B need, but I think it's not really fully served the B2C need. And so, all of the amazing content that people can watch is still trapped in many cases behind authentication and, unique kind of user flows that are, a struggle to the average user. I mean, again, I don't think anyone on this call probably struggles to find a show, but I bet we all serve as a role to our friends and family to help them figure out how some of this stuff should work together between the different device experiences and kind of ecosystems that are out there. So TV, people want it to be easy. They always have, right? TV is essentially, for most people, a kind of relaxation medium. And, a lot of people aren't looking for it to be a brand new kind of puzzle to figure out. And so in that regards, I think they are, and that's one, as Jeremy was saying, it's one of the reasons I think that the FAST has done well, is that it's a really known and understood experience. And we ought to, as an industry, I think, focus a little bit more on the consumer portion of it and maybe a little bit less on the, brand driven, trying to get the brand in front of the consumer at all costs, at the cost of their experience, to really find content that will delight them and keep up the engagement overall.
Yeah, Trent, just a bit of a devil's advocate point, though, because I brought this up initially. The one service I mentioned that does have an EPG that's very front and center is Peacock. Now, you could argue that their numbers are not nearly as good as some of these other services, but that's also related to models and content. But, just for purposes of this discussion, I brought it up, the EPG. There it is front and center with Peacock, yet their viewing numbers and their subscriber numbers are struggling, I guess is the best way to put it.
And Matt, I think that's a good segue to my next question, which I think is perfect for Jeremy. Looking at in particular Tastemade's business model, what are effective ways, and this is very pertinent to Peacock, effective ways to drive signups and subscriptions for content services today, and including trials. What strategies are proving effective, and how should those strategies vary according to the type of service you have?
Sure. So for us, there's, I think, a myriad of tactics. One is just be very targeted with our messaging on the content and the brand. Talk about Tastemade and our brand equity. I think a lot of emphasis that we are now starting to place is, and we recently had a head of marketing join us for the first time to really focus on this, is how do we build that brand equity for these shows? How do we make these shows must-watch moments, whether Struggle Meals, Mad Good Food, a new season of Broken Bread, which will premiere in January of next year, making these shows must-watch moments for us and sending it out. And to Matt, your point about Peacock, I think they maybe have struggled with creating a must-watch moment for the service, where Netflix has had Squid Game and a myriad of other things. HBO Max has the in-theater movies as well as Succession and stuff. So I think that is a big focus for us, is creating that marketing awareness and driving that, and then combining that with amazing content. And then secondly, where a lot of our focus is finding new touch points. There's a partnership that's being live to now, so I'll have to be very careful about how I talk about it, because but we are partnered with a food delivery service where members of that, or subscribers to that food delivery service, will get an extended free trial of Tastemade. We've done this with brand. We did this with Australia, which is a beer manufacturer, where if you bought a 6-pack of their beer, and we had an advertising partnership with them, you got in a free trial of Tastemade. So a lot of it is finding interesting hooks. Now you have to make the hook has to make sense. You can't just be, I think, blindly throwing these offers out to users, because it won't have relevance, and the user will be like, well, what is this? I don't get it. I'm just not going to respond. But I think it's just finding unique ways to reach the user, perhaps when they are not being over inundated with messaging, where you're going to get their attention and you're going to get them to sign up for a service that, all right, ends up delivering value to them. And I think it's finding those touch points are going to prove to be very valuable for us. Paul, you're on mute. Sorry.
I think there's a lot of interesting possibility there, and we had touched on some of that during a panel we had yesterday in terms of hybrid business models, and we'll touch a bit more on that in the panel to come later today on OTT bundling partnerships. And I think that there's different avenues. What's the right word here? You mentioned touch points, different vectors to get to that subscriber, to get to that particular content niche, or to get to that intention that are not necessarily purely related to your service, right? An ancillary product or something that's related and in that fold. I'd like to move to looking at acquisition, and we've talked a lot about maybe more in the retention fold and consistent engagement, but it's also important to bring people in. And when we look at the level of competition today, you constantly need to be looking at acquisition as well. You can't forget about that just because the potential for churn is so high. And so you constantly need to be acquiring to make up for those subscribers that are potentially lost as churn is ongoing. And services need to be increasingly proactive and preemptive. And one of the ways that one of the value propositions of AI and ML that's so interesting and appealing for this industry is its ability to make those inferences, to predict behaviors before they happen, and to really automate that process of discovering these trends, but also to understand how best someone might be motivated to come into the customer fold. And so, Matt, what are effective ways to identify and engage potential customers early?
There's a couple of facets involved, Paul. That's a very good question. So first and foremost, I think my advice to some of these program executives that I've spoken with is be careful what you offer in the basket initially. It's kind of like putting out your Halloween candy in a big bucket on your front door, right? Your actual mileage may vary as to how many kids take how many pieces. In this case, I'm talking about trials for a service. So again, if we've got behaviors that are understood like binge watching, and someone's coming to your service because purposely to watch a particular show, and you've got every episode of that show offered in a free tier, and whether it's a 7-day trial, a 14-day trial, or God forbid a 30-day trial, you can bet that free subscriber is going to do everything they can to watch every episode for free, and they have no incentive to sign up. So again, we can use data and content performance and see what's happening, and those are dead giveaway indicators that someone's got their pedal to the metal and they're likely to watch that content hit the wall and eject from the service. Pardon the automobile analogy. So using those signals, though, we can trigger flags and see certain things happening. We had a situation with a customer a while back where we divide AI and ML into supervised and unsupervised sort of activities. Supervised are looking for things like Gabe mentioned earlier, credit card expirations, are simple triggers where we know that there can be an event that's going to be forced. Unsupervised are taking a look at a data set and letting the AI and ML just kind of run over it and see if it sees any other trends. And in this case, we found out that the service had about 1,500 viewers who were in a trial period who didn't have an expiration date. So they're watching months worth of content to the tune of millions of dollars of expenses to this company. So little things like that, where you kind of catch flags, you catch signals to understand the behavior of the audience so that you can proactively act on it as opposed to sit back and just see things happen. The other thing I'd like to mention is just thinking proactively about where the service might grow. I mean, Pluto TV did an interesting thing a couple of years back in 2020 where they offered Narcos on the Spanish language version of the service, and it really resonated and it helped them catapult into a new territory, new revenue streams, right? With language specific content that helped them launch an entire new arm of the service. So thinking about a particular piece of content and how it is performing in a region is important, but also thinking about that ancillary market or audience that maybe you're not touching today, I think is very important as well.
Yeah, and I think the AI has a lot of great potential there to pull in that audience that you're not seeing as of yet is related. That's potentially the next great place where you can pull in subscribership from. I think my next question now is really it's top of mind in a couple different ways. One, because it looks at a trend in user experiences that's happening today, which is super aggregation, bringing lots of services together into a content forward experience, right? Content-based experience, and really how to manage that. And I think doing content-centric aggregation in the device interface or the user experience is a trend we're seeing. And does this really present newer or particular challenges or opportunities when it comes to maintaining engagement? And I think being a company concerned really about data that helps make this super aggregation happen. Trent, I'd like to go to you for this particular question.
Sure. Thanks, Paul. Obviously, we think that consumers really want that aggregation. The average consumer, as we know, is looking for a piece of content. Sure, they may have some brand loyalty, they may be on certain services, but aggregation really serves the consumer best. And I think we know in this industry that serving the consumer best is the way that the entire industry kind of flourishes to the best. Right now, there is a little bit of tension, as I was mentioning, between the B2C and B2B, because there's so much kind of competition for these users. When you have them, you really try to not let them go back to the aggregation point. But the aggregation points have so many advantages. It was discussed by Gabriel as well. Like, there's more viewpoint into a consumer. When you're looking at a user across all the different services, you just have a really better understanding of who they are. That means you can offer them better recommendations. That means you can offer them a better search experience. It means if they're fans of a particular, sport or musician, and that person has a live performance, you can bring that directly in front of that consumer. I think honestly, what I would say is that the initial trend of kind of moving away from aggregation was really based around kind of early kind of application architectures. And that, again, on the technology side, we still have work to do to figure out how to move people seamlessly from these platforms to an individual service. And the biggest services who are themselves trying to be super aggregators, you look at, say, like, HBO or Peacock or so forth, might have enough to draw people in. But for the medium to long tail, you need to understand that aggregation environment, because that's how consumers are going to find your content, at least in my opinion, a large percentage of the time. And so that means understanding the data layer. It means understanding how your content is understood by these platforms. The Gracenote data set is used, foundationally by most of the major platforms as a way to understand content, so making sure that yours is linked and it's referenced. Again, as we discussed, you have really good merchandising around that content, around images and descriptions and all the things that really draw a user into it. Because the advantage of doing, personalization at the platform level is just you've got millions, if not billions, of users in some cases, where in an individual service is going to have a lens into a smaller set of users and a smaller set of content. So really looking to power the aggregation level and understanding how users go through it is going to be really important, I think, for the medium and long tail, where pure brand recognition won't be enough to draw somebody into a service all the time.
Yeah, I agree, especially because it's not something you can resist right now. I mean, what we're seeing in terms of UXs across devices, and whether that's in pay TV or that's on the consumer side with our smart TVs and streaming media players that we buy at retail, super aggregation is happening. It's going to happen. I mean, it's going to be maybe not perfectly achieved, but it's going to happen. So finding ways to really come to the top in that experience, right? And whether that's contextually driven or as simple as placement, right? Visually driven, that's going to be increasingly important for services. And
especially when we get to like event-based, content.
Right.
I mean, look, live in sports, as we were discussing, is a future here. If that user watches today versus tomorrow, that's an entirely different content stream they're looking at. And so the platform has to notify them about your content. And always, we all know that those events will also generate the highest advertising revenue. Like, we've got to find ways to do that, because that platform is where that live content will be found, unless very specifically you've got your plan, it's this service, this time of day, this particular thing. Certain sports fans will do that, but in order to really fulfill the promise of allowing all of that sports content, the global sports interest, to be able to be discovered in real time, the platforms are the only place that can deliver that.
Agreed. I think we've got two more questions I'd like to cover before we go to Q&A. And my next one, I'd like to actually get Damien to pitch in on this one. Damien, once we see subscribers are in the fold, content-related engagement is basically seen as key to staving off churn in this industry. And how can this be utilized effectively? And how can it really be integrated with your marketing and communications as well?
Another great question. Thank you. We absolutely. I used to work at Now TV, which is part of Sky. It's their OTT service they launched. I was there probably 7-8 years ago. And the one data point that sticks in my mind from that is if you could get users over the 3 viewings of movies or TV series per month, 3 was the magic number, get them over that, and your churn went right down. So we showed this really strong link between content engagement and the churn, but it wasn't linear. It was this weird sort of threshold at 3. And I think a lot of services that we power the personalization for now, it's that same sort of story. So clearly it's very, very important. I talked earlier about how we are doing personalization in marketing, particularly emails, and how you can get quite clever with that quite quickly. So, when somebody gets to the end of a TV series, that's a real moment where they sit there and go, what am I going to watch next? If an opportune email arrives saying, hey, you've just watched X and we think you might like Y, and it works, then you can keep that user within your service and engaging with it. And again, therefore, it links to churn. But the other thing I mentioned earlier is really important. A lot of services have brand new big headline shows that they've chosen for, not just content reasons, but also brand reasons. And you've got to make sure these features in your recommendation is nothing's worse for a consumer when they've seen some marketing or some publicity for a particular show and they have to hunt to find it on your service. So again, this is where we work with editorial teams to say, hey, here's the content, and the editors can boost certain content, and they can boost it so it guarantees it always appears first, but they can boost it a little bit so it gets only recommended for people that would have seen it anyway, just a bit higher. So that's sort of working together to make sure the whole marketing and user interface experience is very coherent is really, really important. That was probably it, actually. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, that very good points on how to really look at engagement as part of a larger subscriber journey and really leveraging your marketing and communications there. And I think we're running slightly over, but I think I want to close out one last question here that I'm going to ask Jeremy to pitch in on, which I think is increasingly relevant today, partially because, when we look at what OTT has done for the consumer, it's opened up an incredible amount of choice. But really, that choice is not necessarily coming from just having these large tentpole services, your Amazons, Netflixes, and Disney Pluses of the world. It really comes from the diversity of content that's out there and specialized services. And I think there's a challenge here really for specialized and niche services, that different content genres attract different types of subscribers in different subscriber demographics. So the example I love to use is BritBox versus UFC Fight Pass. Right. So, how do effective acquisition and engagement strategies vary, or should they vary, according to either genre or subscriber type? Jeremy, how do you feel about this one?
Sure. So I would say the strategy is definitely going to vary. I think the genre is relevant, but I would also look at the audience, right? Is that audience likely going to be a loyal subscriber, and your biggest challenge is going to be acquiring them? And therefore, you're going to focus on, all right, we just need to get them into the funnel. But once they're in the funnel, there's not a lot of leakage. Or customer acquisition is relatively easy. You could take UFC, right? I imagine there's a very high engagement around key fights and key moments. But after those key fights and key moments, there's probably a big drop off, right? So churn is perhaps a bigger issue. And so I think it's really thinking about this genre matters, but I think less in terms of the genre itself and more about like the calendar of events, or how, as we talked about earlier in the session, engagement being a big issue, how to keep that audience engaged versus, oh no, you really got a subscriber acquisition challenge, and thinking it differently about, once you get users on top of the funnel, then you've got them locked in. So I think from us around niche services, I think the good news is that we definitely have a very specific audience to go after. We know who that audience is. I think the challenge is just making sure we deliver value to that audience. Clearly, Netflix at a 4K plan being above $10 a month, and every other service has kind of been slowly increasing prices over the last few years. We're at $2.99 a month or $19.99 a year. We're definitely at a much lower value proposition. So I think that is helpful to us. I think it's then kind of also figuring out, how do we differentiate ourselves as a niche service? The challenge is, as there are these niche, putting sports aside, sports and news aside, there are a lot of these niche products. Drama Fever, which was well ahead of the Korean soap opera and content coming out of Asia, well ahead of that than versus like Netflix, which then came on to serve Squid Game. But the challenge with these niche services is a lot of that content is represented on these other broad services, right? So trying to figure out how do we deliver value beyond the content itself, I think is going to be critical for these niche services to thrive. BritBox has done incredibly well. I think it's, that Acorn have really demonstrated, look, if you serve a community well, you have authenticity within your brand, you can curate shows that are not readily discoverable, then yeah, you can develop a loyal audience and grow as a scalable business.
Yeah, I think a lot of really good points, focusing in on the unique traits of your audience and really understanding any particular seasonality or time-based aspect to the content can really make a lot of differences. And I'd like to, we're up against time, but we're going to fit in 2 Q&A questions here from the audience. But before I do that, I'd like to thank everyone on the panel for a terrific discussion. Lots of great content here from different angles into the engagement issue. And I'm going to open things up for 2 questions. And the first of which I think is very relevant to a couple things that we touched on during our conversation in terms of business models and conversion and so on. And the question from the audience was, how has the elimination of free trials by some services impacted subscribership? And I guess as a take on this, how does it affect the view of effective business models in the industry, right? Are trials still an effective way to bring people in, or how does this change the dynamic?
I think you have to, Paul. Some of this content's going to be so interesting and so exclusive to some services that you're going to get the natural progression of people saying, I'll pay the $5 a month or the $7 or $8 a month, just because they're fans. That content resonates with them. But I think still, the best and the most successful tool to bring in new audiences to the services is to offer some sort of limited free trial, again, with educated constraints on the library, the amount of content, especially when it comes to rights. We've talked about that a couple times with sports, right? That's going to be the golden chalice that sits at the top of the stack. But I think free trials have to be part of what you're going to appeal to the masses with to get them to come, to the trough, so to say.
I would, add to that. I think if you look at the services getting rid of the free trials, is services that users clearly have an understanding what the service is about. So if you're a Disney Plus or Netflix, you don't have a user education problem. You perhaps have a user signing up to watch a particular show and then leaving problem. So I think it particularly makes sense for them, but this is not a one-size-fits-all business for any. To support what Matt just said, I think free trials are a great way to bring users in.
Perfect. I'd like to fit one more in, and I agree. Trials, I don't think trials have to go away or that they should go away, but I think a better understanding of how truly to leverage the trial process and to convert is going to be essential. And I would think that everybody that is in the business of ingesting data and understanding where patterns lie, aka AI and ML, that's really going to be increasingly crucial in making trials an effective way to drive subscribership or paid subscribership in particular. Speaking of data, how granular does a provider need to get with data to be able to make good decisions? And it seems like with so much data out there, it's a challenge to understand what are the important pieces of data to pay attention to, and are these kinds of decisions also dependent on the type of providers?
We've had some. Oh, sorry.
I was just a quick comment, Damien. I was just going to say, it sounds like the question is it comes from a bit of a what should we throw away and what should we keep? I would argue that all of the data is important, and that you need to bucket and silo this content so that you can analyze it, normalize it. Even would be the word that we would use, because the data coming in from AWS is different than the data coming in from Google. It's different than the data from Apple TV Plus. So normalize it, look at it all in one plane so that you can make the best decisions. I don't think it's a matter of picking and choosing and throwing things out. It's all valuable.
From our point of view, from doing personalizations and recommendations, actually, one of the lessons I've learned over the last year is we've stopped asking for all data. I used to win a client and go, just send us everything, and we'd be slightly overwhelmed. Obviously, clients need all their data for different usage, but for recommendations and personalization, we actually now limit it to a few number of fields and make it, really clear what we need and what we don't need, because otherwise, it takes us a long time to sort out all the information. And the other interesting thing I've learned over the last year is we had one potential client came to us and they're very proud. They had 70,000 keywords across their content. And actually, from a recommendation point of view and driving our AI models, that wasn't great. What we're really looking for is the overlap between keywords. So, we found out that 30% of these keywords are only linked to one item of content. And they were right, that they weren't wrong. They were great keywords. But from a recommendation point of view, we're looking for that overlap, and it wasn't there. So we do spend a lot of time grouping keywords together. If you look at something like Die Hard, it's classed as a movie, cop and detective movie, 1, 2, and 3, which to you and I is all the same. So we have AI processes and systems that make sure all the data is combined and treated as the same thing. So I'm a little bit different. I think we need to narrow down the data and really focus on what we need, but that's probably just my perspective on it.
Well, good points, both of you, Matt and Damien, that's not just having the data, it's being able to really ensure that there's quality of that data, right? That it's consistent, that it's usable, and that you're getting down to the parts that are really relevant to drive what you're trying to do with it, whether that's driving subscribership or that's driving increased engagement and better recommendations. So certainly a good point. And I'd love to talk further today, but we're up against time, and I'd like to thank all of you for a really great conversation and really giving some deep and diverse insights on the subject of engagement for our audience. So thank you all for joining us today, and we hope you'll join us in the conversation that we're about to have in our Zoom Rooms networking discussion. And please, those of you in the audience, we couldn't get to all of your Q&A questions, but feel free to join us in the networking discussion, and maybe we can get to some of them there.
So don't forget the white paper.
Oh, yes. And of course, Matt, there's also a Symphony Media AI and Parks Associates white paper that you're welcome to check out. Go to our site or go to the Symphony Media AI site to get a download and reword myself to be able to take a look at that white paper and see some really great insights both from the Parks Associates side and the Symphony Media AI side. So thank you all, gentlemen, for joining us today. And those of you in the audience, we've got our Zoom Rooms networking discussion up next. And also be sure to come back at 2 p.m. Central as we close out a packed year of future video discussions with our panel on OTT bundling partnerships. Please also take a look at our 2022 schedule for future video as well. You can see it up on the screen right now, but it's also on our website. We have a full slate of virtual events planned, including, yes, a return to in-person events. And we've got all of that coming up for 2022, so please check out our website for more information on more great future video sessions in the year ahead. As another reminder, if you're interested in following the ins and outs of today's OTT market in this fast-moving streaming environment, be sure to check out our Parks Associates OTT Video Market Tracker, which gives quarterly and monthly updates on the OTT market. And also remember to feel free to reach out to Jason Paris and the rest of our great sales team at Parks Associates if you're interested in research on OTT, connected devices, and any other research within the variety of areas that we cover across streaming video, pay TV, consumer electronics, connectivity, digital media, and the smart home. If you're interested in sponsorship opportunities for upcoming future video sessions in 2022, reach out to Ashton Gambrell, our strategic account manager, to discuss some of these possibilities in detail. And don't forget, we'll be back here shortly at 2 p.m. Central for our next session on OTT bundling partnerships. So take a short break and come back for more insightful discussion to come. Thank you again to everyone, all of our panelists, to Gabriel and Jenna as well for joining us today. And of course to you, the audience, thank you for joining us. And we hope to see you in our Zoom Rooms networking discussion next and at our next session later today at 2 p.m. Take care.